The Marlow farm sat 2 miles south of Bear Creek, where the wagon road bent east toward the river, and the timothy grass grew high along the fence lines. Sarah Marlow had worked it 4 years alone. Wheat in the north field, corn along the creek, a kitchen garden she kept because her mother had kept one, and because the routine of it steadied a morning that would otherwise have run away from her before breakfast. Every day at first light she went to the barn and let the 2 milk cows out. Every evening she brought them in. In between she did what needed doing on a place that had been built for 2 people and now had one. The town knew where to find her when they needed her. The rest of the time they left her alone, which she had come to prefer without ever quite deciding to. She was in the north field on a Tuesday in early August when she stopped at the end of a row and looked back at what she had cut. The wheat was ready. It had been ready 3 days. She had known it walking out that morning and had known it the morning before that, the way a farmer knows the weight of a thing before the scale confirms it. Alone, she would lose half of it before she was through. She had lost a quarter of it the summer before and had told herself that would be the last time. She stood in the row with the scythe in her hands and the sun climbing. Then she walked back to the house, changed her apron, hitched the wagon, and drove into Bear Creek. He was outside the feed store when she came down the main street. A saddle over one shoulder, a bedroll under the other arm, the look of a man who had come off a long ride and had not yet decided what direction the next one would take. He was tall and lean the way men who worked outside were lean, brown at the neck and forearms, quiet in the way he stood. He was watching a wagon load at the far end of the street with the disinterest of someone with nowhere he had to be. Sarah tied her team at the rail and went into the feed store. She spoke to Mr. Halloran behind the counter, who had known her husband and knew her, and asked him plainly whether any man had come through looking for harvest work. Halloran wiped his hands on his apron and looked past her through the open door at the man leaning against the post outside. "Came in last night," Halloran said. "Rode down from Miles City. Said he was passing through. He put me in mind of somebody who would work if the work was there and would go on if it was not." Sarah looked out the door. The man had not moved. He was looking down the street now, the same disinterested look, a horse tied to the rail beside him with its head down. "You know his name?" Halloran shook his head. "Did not ask. He does not seem the type to press it on a man." She thanked him and went outside. The man saw her coming and straightened without hurrying, took the saddle off his shoulder and set it against the wall. He touched his hat. "Ma'am, I am told you might be looking for work." He looked at her a moment, taking her measure the way she had taken his, not in a hurry, not in a way that pressed anything. "Might be," he said. "Depends on the work." "Harvest," she said. "Wheat mostly. Some corn after. My place is 2 miles south of here. My husband died 4 years ago. It has been me alone since." He did not answer right away. He looked past her at her wagon, at the team standing patient in the sun, and back at her. "I can give you 1 week," he said. His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who had thought before he spoke and would mean what he said afterward. "1 week of work, then I am gone. I do not stay places. That is only fair to tell you before we agree on anything." Sarah nodded slowly. A week was not all of it. But a week was more than she had had that morning. "1 week," she said, "suits me fine. Cash on the last day," he said. "No advance. If the work does not suit you, tell me and I will go." She said her name then, he said his. Reuben Aldridge, out of nowhere in particular, which was another thing he told her plainly and without apology, and she took it the way it was offered. He touched his hat again. "Then I will get my horse." She watched him cross to the rail and untie the animal. The horse lifted its head to him, and he ran a hand along its neck once before he swung up. He was not a man who made a thing of anything. That was what she noticed most on the ride out, him riding a length behind her wagon the whole 2 miles, saying nothing, the road quiet, the timothy grass moving in the light wind along the fences. At the gate to the Marlow place, he drew up beside her and looked out at the north field where the wheat stood ready and gold in the late morning sun. He did not whistle or shake his head. He looked at it the way a man looks at work. "Where do you want me to start?" he said. She showed him the barn first because the barn was where a man measured a place. He looked at the loft and the stalls and the tack room without touching anything, the way a man looks who is already turning over in his mind what he will need and where he will find it. Then she took him out along the fence line to the north field and pointed out where the wheat began and where it ended and where the corn started along the creek. He walked a few rows in with her, stopped, bent down, and took a head of wheat between his fingers. He rolled it once and looked at what came out into his palm. "Ready," he said. 2, 3 days past ready. I know it. He nodded and stood up and brushed his hand on his trouser leg. Neither of them said anything about the 2 or 3 days. It was not the kind of thing that needed saying between people who both understood what it meant to be alone with a piece of ground. She showed him the bunkhouse last, a small board building west of the barn that had been built for hired hands in the years when the farm had run them. It had not been used in 4 years. She had aired it that morning before she drove in, which she had done without letting herself think about why. There was a bed frame with a straw tick, a table, a lamp, a wash basin on a stand, nothing more. He looked at it and set his bedroll on the tick. "Suits," he said. "Supper is at 6 on the porch. You do not have to come in for it, but there will be a plate." "I will come," he said. Obliged. He went to work that afternoon. She watched him from the kitchen window once without meaning to on her way to fetch a jar from the shelf. He was in the north field with the scythe, working the long, even sweep of a man who had done it before and who was in no hurry to prove anything to anybody about it. The rhythm of the blade against the wheat came faint through the open window. She watched him a moment longer than she had intended, and then she went on with what she had been doing. At 6, she set 2 plates on the porch table. Beans, a piece of ham, bread from that morning, coffee. He came up from the field with his hat in his hand and washed at the basin she had set out by the step. He sat down across from her and waited until she had taken up her fork before he took up his. She noticed that. He ate the way a man eats who has eaten in a lot of places and has learned not to make anything of it. He did not speak until she asked him whether the coffee suited, and then he said it did, and that was most of what passed between them at that first supper. When he was done, he stood and took his plate and set it on the sideboard by the kitchen door without being asked. 6 in the morning, he said. "I will have coffee ready." He touched his hat and went to the bunkhouse. She watched him cross the yard in the last of the light, the lean, upright walk of a man who was carrying nothing he did not need, and she stood at the porch a while after he had gone in before she went to bank the stove. That was the first day. The second day he was at the barn before she had finished with the cows, standing in the door with his hat in his hand, waiting for her to be done. He said good morning and asked whether she wanted him to start where he had left off or to move to the stretch nearer the creek. She said the creek stretch, because the wind sometimes came up in the afternoon from that direction, and the standing wheat took it harder than the cut. He nodded once and went. By the end of the third day, he had cut more of the north field alone than she had cut in the last 2 summers together. She stood at the fence at dusk and looked out at what he had laid down, and she did not let herself count how much was left. She let herself look at what was done. The fourth day the wind came up hot from the south, and the wheat that was still standing bent under it in long, uneasy waves. Reuben was in the field before sunrise. She saw the lamp burning in the bunkhouse window when she came out to the barn, and by the time she had the cows in the pasture, he was already at the far end of the north row with the scythe going in the long, steady arc she had come to know the sound of. She brought him water at mid-morning. She had done it the first 3 days without deciding to, and he had taken it without making anything of it, and she had gone back to the house, and that had been the shape of it. This morning she stood at the end of the row a moment longer than she had the days before. He set the scythe against a shock and came over and took the tin cup and drank it down and handed it back. "Wind is going to hold," he said. He looked at the sky the way a farmer looks at the sky. "We ought to bind what is down before it starts moving on us. I will help." He looked at her once. Then he nodded and went back for the scythe and did not say anything about her sleeves or her hands, or whether it was work for a woman to do, which she had half expected him to and had already had her answer ready for. He had not made it necessary. She noticed that too. They worked the rest of the morning together, him cutting ahead, her coming behind and binding the sheaves and standing them in shocks along the row. The wind pulled at her apron and at the loose hair along her neck, and she did not slow. He did not slow either. He worked at the pace of a man who had learned a long time ago that the way to finish a field was to not think about the field but only about the row, and she worked the same way beside him without either of them saying so. At noon she went to the house and brought back bread and cold ham and a jar of buttermilk, and they sat in the shade of the wagon at the end of the row and ate without much talking. He asked her once about the corn, whether it was hers alone or whether she had a share arrangement with anybody in town. She said it was hers. He nodded and did not ask anything further, and she did not offer anything further, and the silence between them was the kind of silence that did not require correcting. When they went back to the row, she found she was watching his hands more than she meant to. The way he set the scythe, the way he kept the blade angled just so against the wheat and never had to correct it in the middle of a sweep. She had watched her husband do the same work for 6 years and had never watched it the way she was watching it now, which was something she noticed on the walk back to the house that evening and set aside without letting herself look at it too long. That night at supper, he stayed on the porch after the plates were cleared. She had gone in to bank the stove, and when she came out he was still in the chair, his hat on the rail beside him, looking out at the yard in the last of the light. She stood in the doorway a moment. Then she brought the coffee pot out and refilled both cups without asking and sat down. The wind had died with the sun. The corn along the creek moved a little in whatever air was left and then went still. He looked at his cup, then at the field. 3 days should finish the wheat, he said, if the weather holds. She nodded. And the corn will hold another week or 10 days before it needs bringing in. Depends on the nights. He turned the cup once in his hands. That will be past me, but you can get the corn alone if you have to. Wheat was the one that was going to beat you. She looked at her own cup. She did not say anything to that. She had known it walking into Bear Creek on Tuesday. She had known it standing in the row with the scythe in her hands. Hearing him say it plainly without any weight on it was a different thing than knowing it. She let it sit. He drank his coffee. She drank hers. The light went out of the yard slowly, and neither of them moved to bring a lamp. The 5th day the wheat was mostly down, and the field looked different, the long-standing gold of it replaced by the low, even lines of shocks running north to south along the rows. She walked the field at first light and stood at the near end and looked at it for a while before she went to the barn. For years she had come out to that field alone in August, and she had never once seen it look like that. Reuben was at the shocks when she brought his coffee. He had started early again. She held the tin cup out and he took it and drank half of it standing and handed it back for her to hold while he set another sheaf. "You are going to run out of week," she said, "before you run out of field." He looked up at her, then out at what was left of the north row. He did not answer right away. He wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist and took the cup back from her and finished the coffee. "I have thought about that," he said. She waited. He did not add anything. "The corn is not touched," she said, "and the wheat still needs thrashing after it is stood. That is a week's work by itself with 2. He set the empty cup on the ground beside the shock and picked up the next sheaf and stood it. "I told you a week," he said. He was not looking at her when he said it. He was working. "That was what I could offer you fair." A man ought not tell a woman he is staying when he does not know it himself. She stood at the end of the row a moment. Then she nodded once, though he was not looking to see it, and she went back to the house. She did not go back out to the field the rest of the morning. She kneaded bread and set it to rise and scrubbed the porch step which did not need scrubbing, and she did not let herself think about what he had said or about the way he had not looked at her when he said it. At noon she took the dinner out to the wagon at the end of the row and set it down, and he came and washed at the water barrel and they ate in the shade, and neither of them mentioned the morning. That afternoon, a wagon came up the lane. She was at the porch when she saw the dust and she stood and watched it come. It was Halloran from the feed store, sitting on the seat beside a man she did not know, both of them dressed for town rather than for a call at a farm. She wiped her hands on her apron and went down to meet them. Halloran climbed down and touched his hat. "Mrs. Marlow, this here is Mr. Petrie. He has come down from Miles City looking for a man who was working through this way. He set the reins on the brake. Said he might have found himself out at your place." The other man got down. He was heavier set than Halloran, red in the face from the ride, dressed like a man who was used to being listened to. He looked past her toward the field. "Aldridge," he said. "Reuben Aldridge. Halloran here says you took him on Tuesday." "I did." Petrie looked at her with the frank measuring look of a man who did not much bother about how the look landed. Then he looked out at the field again where Reuben was visible at the far end, working the row, not yet aware of the wagon. "He has been on my place 3 seasons, Petrie said. "Foreman the last 2. Best hand I have ever had, and I have had a great many. Rode off in June without a word to anybody. I have been 6 weeks tracking him down." Sarah looked at him. "He is under no obligation to you," she said, "that I know of." "No obligation," Petrie said. He waved a hand. "That is not what I came about. I came to ask him back. I have a place open at the top of my operation, and I will not fill it while he is loose in the country. I mean to make him an offer he will hear." She looked at Halloran. Halloran would not quite meet her eyes. Down the row, Reuben had stopped and was looking toward the house. She stepped aside. It was not her conversation, and she knew it. She said she would put coffee on, and she went up the porch steps and into the kitchen without looking back. She stood at the stove a moment with her hands on the rail and listened to her own breath, and then she filled the pot and set it on the fire. From the window over the basin, she could see the 3 of them meeting at the middle of the yard. Reuben had come up from the field with his hat in his hand. Petrie had done most of the talking, gesturing once toward town, once toward the north, standing the way a man stands who is used to a conversation moving in the direction he points it. Halloran had stayed a step back. Reuben had listened. That was mostly what she saw. He had listened without interrupting, without shifting his weight, the hat turning slowly in his hands. She could not hear what was said. She did not try to. After a while, Halloran and Petrie got back in the wagon. Petrie said one more thing, leaning down from the seat. Reuben nodded once. The wagon turned in the yard and went back down the lane, and the dust rose behind it in the late afternoon light and drifted east on what little breeze there was. Reuben stood in the yard a moment after they were gone. Then he put his hat on and came up to the porch. She met him at the door with the coffee. He took the cup and thanked her and did not sit. He stood at the rail and looked out at the lane where the dust was still settling. "You heard him," he said. "I heard some of it, not the offer. Foreman's wage and a house," he said. He said it plainly, without weight on it, the way he said most things. "His own house on the property, a share of the increase on the 3rd year if I stay through it." She held her cup. She did not answer. "I told him I would give him an answer by Sunday." Sunday was 2 days off. The end of the week. She nodded and looked at her cup and did not say anything, and after a moment he drank his coffee down and set the cup on the rail and went back to the field. She did not sleep well that night. She had not expected to, and she did not try to force it. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle, and to the wind moving in the corn along the creek, and she thought about the 4 years, and about the field that morning with the shocks standing in the long, even rows, and about the way he had not looked at her, when he said a man ought not tell a woman he is staying when he does not know it himself. She thought about that a long time. She got up before first light and went to the barn and did the cows, and then she stood at the fence at the edge of the north field in the gray hour before the sun came up and looked at what he had done. She was still there when he came out of the bunkhouse. He saw her and crossed the yard and came up to the fence beside her. He did not say anything. He looked at the field with her. "I am not going to ask you to stay," she said. She kept her eyes on the field. "That is not a thing I have any right to." He was quiet. "But I want to say the thing that is true," she said, "because you have been honest with me all week and you deserve that back." The light was coming up along the eastern edge of the field. The shocks were turning from gray to gold in slow order down the row. "You have not been a hired hand at this place," she said. "Not for 2 days now. You have been something else. I do not know what to name it, and I am not going to try. But you ought to know that whatever you decide by Sunday, I know the difference, and I will not pretend I do not." He did not answer right away. She had not expected him to. After a while he said, "Obliged." Just that. Then he turned from the fence and went to the barn for his tools, and she stood at the fence a while longer before she went back to the house to start the coffee. The 6th day he did not go to the field first. He went to the barn and pulled the wagon out into the yard and greased the axles and checked the tongue and the single tree, work that had needed doing and that she had been meaning to get to since June. She saw him from the kitchen window and did not go out. She let him work. When he was done with the wagon, he brought it around back of the barn and went into the tool shed and came out with the file and sat on the bench by the door and set an edge on the scythe blade and on the sickle and on the two axes she kept for kindling. Only when all of that was done did he take the scythe and go out to the last of the north field. She watched some of it from the porch that afternoon. She had told herself she would not, and then she had come out with a basket of mending and had sat down, and she had not opened the basket. She sat with it on her lap and watched him work down the last of the row. She thought about Petri. She thought about the house on the property and the share of the increase on the third year, and about the fact that Reuben had not told her anything about the offer beyond what he had told her at the porch rail, which was the offer itself, and nothing about how he had heard it or what it had sounded like coming at him. She thought about her own words at the fence in the gray hour. She did not regret them. She had said what was true. She had also said what could not be taken back, and she knew it. And she sat on the porch with the mending on her lap, and she did not touch the mending, and she let the knowing sit. At supper, he came up from the field and washed at the basin and sat across from her at the porch table, and they ate. He asked her whether the corn along the near end of the creek row had been showing any tassel damage from the wind, and she said not that she had seen, and he nodded, and that was most of what passed between them. When he was done, he took his plate to the sideboard and stood a moment at the kitchen door. "Would you sit a while?" he said. After she said she would, he went and washed the plates. She had never seen him do it before. He did not make anything of it. He washed them and stacked them and dried his hands on the towel by the basin and came out to the porch and sat in the chair across from hers and set his hat on the rail. The last light was going out of the yard. The corn along the creek stood dark against the sky. Somewhere down the road a dog began barking and then stopped. "I have thought about it," he said. She waited. "I told you the first day I do not stay places. That was the truth as I knew it. I have not stayed anywhere longer than a season since I was 17 years old." He turned his hat once on the rail. "Petri's offer is a good offer. It is more money than I have ever made, and a house of my own and a share on the third year that would set a man up. Any man in this country would take it." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I'm not going to take it." She did not look up right away. She waited until she was sure her face would hold. Then she looked at him. "I am going to stay through the corn," he said, "and through the thrashing. That is 3 weeks or thereabouts. I will draw the same wage we agreed on for the first week and no more, because that is what was fair between us, and I am not going to change the terms in the middle." She nodded slowly. "After the corn," he said. He stopped. He looked out at the yard. "After the corn, I would like to talk about what comes after, if you are willing to. I am not asking you tonight. I am telling you where I am so you know." She sat with that for a long moment. The porch was mostly dark now. The last band of red had gone out of the western sky, and the first stars were coming out one at a time above the corn along the creek. "I am willing," she said. That was all. She said it quietly, and she did not look away when she said it, and he did not look away either. Neither of them made more of it than that. He nodded once. He looked at the yard for a while longer, and then he stood and touched his hat and said, "Good night, Sarah," which was the first time he had used her name. He went to the bunkhouse, and she sat on the porch until the lamp went out in his window, and then she sat a while after that. That was Saturday. Sunday morning, he rode into Bear Creek at first light. She did not ask him what he was going to say, and he did not tell her, and she stood at the porch and watched him go down the lane, and then she went to the barn and did the cows, and did not think about what the conversation in town would sound like, which was easier than she had expected it to be, because she knew the shape of the man now well enough to know the shape of the conversation. He came back before noon. She saw the dust on the road, and she did not come out to meet him. She let him put the horse up and come to the house on his own time. He came to the kitchen door and stood with his hat in his hand. "Done," he said. She nodded. He looked at her a moment, and then he said he was decent about it. He did not make it hard. He said he had expected it walking up to the porch here on Friday and had come anyway because he had to. He said if I ever needed a place there would be one, and I said I was obliged, and that was the end of it. She nodded again. He stood in the doorway a moment more. Then he said, "Corn will start needing us in about a week. I mean to spend this week getting the barn floor ready and the cribs cleaned and the wagons in shape. If that suits, it suits." He touched his hat and went back to the yard. The next week ran the way weeks run when there is more work than time and two people who know how to be near each other without making a study of it. He worked on the barn floor and the cribs. She put up the last of the tomatoes and did the wash and set the summer kitchen in order for the fall canning. They took dinner together at noon under the shade of the porch and supper together in the evening, and they did not talk much and neither of them minded. Twice that week she caught herself standing at the kitchen window watching him cross the yard with a load of something, and both times she made herself turn away before he could see her doing it, and both times she was not sure why. It was not that she did not want him to see her. It was that she was not yet used to the fact of watching him at all, of a man being in the yard again to be watched, and she wanted to grow used to it slowly and on her own before she made a public thing of it, even between the two of them. He noticed once. She was certain of it. He came up onto the porch with a bucket of water, and she was at the basin and had just turned from the window, and he looked at her a moment as he set the bucket down and did not say anything and touched his hat and went back out. She stood at the basin and felt her face warm, and then she laughed once, quietly, at herself, which she had not done in 4 years, and she went on with what she had been doing. By the middle of the week the corn was showing the color he had been waiting for. He walked the creek row Thursday morning and came back and said Saturday. She said Saturday and he nodded and went to sharpen the corn knives. Friday evening he stayed on the porch after supper the way he had taken to doing. The candle on the porch rail had not been lit in 4 years. She had put it away the fall Daniel died and had not brought it back out. It sat in the sideboard in a tin holder wrapped in a piece of muslin, and she had not looked at it since the spring after, when she had opened the drawer for something else and had seen it, and had closed the drawer and gone on with what she had been doing. Friday evening after supper, she went inside and stood in front of the sideboard a while. Then she opened the drawer. She brought it out to the porch. Reuben was in his chair with his hat on the rail and his coffee on the arm of the chair beside him, and he watched her come out with the holder in her hands and did not say anything. She set it on the rail. She did not light it. She sat down in her chair. He did not ask. "Daniel and I used to sit out here in the evenings," she said. "The candle stayed on the rail from supper until we went in. It was not for reading or for anything in particular. It was for sitting." She looked at the holder. The muslin had left a faint press mark on the tin. "I put it away when he died. I could not have it out and I could not throw it out, so it went in the drawer." Reuben nodded slowly. He did not say anything. "I am not going to light it tonight," she said. "I brought it out because I wanted it to be out. I wanted to see whether I could put it on the rail without minding. I find that I can." She looked at him then. He was looking at the holder and not at her, which she took as the kindness it was. He did not turn to her until she had finished looking at him and had gone back to her own cup. Then he said, "When you want it lit, you tell me. I will light it." That was all he said. She did not answer right away. She sat with her cup in both hands and she looked out at the yard. After a while she said, "Obliged." He nodded. They sat until the coffee was gone. She took the holder back inside before she went to bed. She set it on the sideboard rather than in the drawer. The corn began Saturday. He cut and she followed with the wagon. She had done it alone the past 3 years and had told herself each time she would find help the next year and had not. Because finding help meant going into town and asking meant explaining, and explaining meant standing in the feed store with Mr. Halloran being kind to her while other people looked away, and she had chosen the corn over the asking every time. This year she followed the wagon along the creek row and watched him work ahead of her, and she thought about that and did not say anything about it, because there was no need to say anything about it to him. He knew. She had known he would know from the second day. They worked the creek row through Saturday and into Sunday. On Sunday afternoon the wagon was full, and he drove it up to the crib and they unloaded together and drove back down and started the next row before supper. He did not stop for the Sabbath. She had not asked him to, and he had not offered, and neither of them made anything of it. The corn did not know it was Sunday. Monday it rained. They stayed in the barn and shelled seed corn from the ears she had set aside in the spring, and they sat on upturned crates with a bucket between them and worked steadily through the morning without saying much. The rain on the barn roof was the loudest thing in the barn. It was the kind of rain that settled a person, the steady kind, not the kind that made a man watch the window. At noon she went to the house and brought back dinner, and they ate on the crates with the bucket pushed aside. He asked her about her people and she told him. Her mother in Ohio, gone now 6 years. Her father before that. A brother in Denver she wrote to twice a year and heard back from once. She had come out with Daniel in '78, the year they married. He listened the way he listened to everything, which was fully and without interrupting, and without any expression on his face that suggested he was waiting for his turn to speak. When she was done he ate a while longer, and then he told her about himself, because she had told him, and because it was fair, and he did not make more of it than that. He had grown up on a place in Kansas that had gone under in the '70s. His father had died the year the place went, and his mother the year after, and he had been 16 and had gone out looking for work and had not stopped since. 22 years. He named a few of the places: a cattle outfit in the Panhandle, a freight line out of Cheyenne, 3 seasons on a horse operation in the Judith Basin. Then Petrie, 3 years. I never saw a place I wanted to stop at, he said. He was looking at his hands. It was not that I was running from anything. I want you to know that. It was that I never came to the place that made me want to be at it more than I wanted to be moving. He turned an ear of corn once in his hands and set it in the bucket. I saw yours on Tuesday, he said, before I ever saw you. I had ridden out that morning to look at the country south of town because I had decided to move on. I came up the road and saw your field standing ready and no one in it and the shocks not started, and I knew what I was looking at. I rode back into Bear Creek because I did not want to guess and knock on the door of a man's place and be wrong. Halloran was going to be the one to tell me. I did not know it was going to be you who came in. She looked at him. He did not look up. I told you 1 week because I did not know how to tell you anything else on a Tuesday morning, he said, and it was true when I said it. Then Wednesday morning I came out to the field and I knew it was not going to be true and I did not know what to do about it, so I said the thing I had already said and went to work. The rain went on outside. Then Petrie came, she said. Then Petrie came. She nodded slowly. She did not say anything for a while. She had heard most of it already in different ways, in the shape of the week rather than the words, but hearing the words was a different thing, and she let herself sit with them. I am glad you saw the field, she said. He looked up at that. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went back to the corn and did not say anything more for a while, and neither did she. The rain lasted through Tuesday. They finished the seed corn and cleaned the tack and mended 2 harnesses that had been waiting since spring. Wednesday came clear and cool and they went back to the creek row. By Friday the corn was in and the cribs were full, and the wagon stood empty in the yard for the first time in 2 weeks. That evening at supper, he was quiet even by his own measure. She noticed it and did not press. He cleared the plates and washed them and came out to the porch and did not sit. He stood at the rail with his hat in his hand and looked out at the yard. Sarah, she looked up. I have been thinking on how to say this and I have not found a way that is better than plain. So I am going to say it plain. She set her cup down. I would like to marry you, he said. If you will have me. I know it is quick. I know the corn is barely in and the thrashing is not started, and there is no calendar in which this would be the ordinary hour to say a thing like this. I am saying it anyway because I have been sure of it since the morning at the fence, and I did not want to speak on it until the corn was in because I did not want it to sound like a man asking for a place. He turned his hat once. It is not for the place. I want that plain too. It is for you. The place is yours and would stay yours whether I stayed or went. I am asking about the staying. She looked at him. She did not answer right away. She had known, walking out to the porch that evening, that something was coming. She had not known the shape of it. She sat with the shape of it now. She stood up from her chair. She did not answer him yet. She went to the sideboard through the open door and came back with the candle in the tin holder, and she set it on the rail. She looked at him. Would you light it, she said. He went still. He looked at the holder and then at her, and she saw him take a breath and hold it a moment before he let it go. He set his hat on the chair. He took the tin of matches from the pocket of his coat and he struck one against the rail. His hand was steady. He held the match to the wick and the wick took and he shook out the match and set the burned end on the rail beside the holder. The flame stood up straight in the still air. He looked at her across it. "Yes," she said, "to the marrying." Yes, he let his breath go, long and slow. He did not reach for her yet. He looked at the flame and then at her and he nodded once and he sat down in his chair across from her with the candle between them on the rail. The porch was dark around the small circle of light. The corn along the creek stood dark against the sky and the yard was quiet. Somewhere in the barn, a cow moved once against the stall and settled again. She sat down. They did not speak for a while. She looked at the flame and she thought about Daniel and about the 4 years and about the drawer in the sideboard where the holder had lain wrapped in muslin. And she thought about the morning on the road into Bear Creek, and the morning at the fence in the gray hour, and the rain on the barn roof, and all of it sat in the small circle of light on the rail together, and none of it asked anything of any other part of it to move. After a while he said, "When?" "Spring," she said. "After the plowing." He nodded. "Spring," he said, "that suits." They were quiet again. The candle burned even. There was almost no wind. "You said 1 week," she said. She was not teasing him. She was saying it because it was the thing that was in her mind. She wanted him to hear her say it. He looked at her. "I did," he said. "You are going to have to answer for that," she said. "Every anniversary." He almost smiled. She had not seen him smile the whole 4 weeks, and she saw the beginning of it now at the corner of his mouth. And it did not go further than that, but it was there. "I expect I will," he said. They sat on the porch a while longer. He did not move his chair closer to hers, and she did not move hers closer to his. There would be time for that. They sat with the candle on the rail between them and the yard dark around them, and the corn in the crib, and the wheat threshed and stacked in the barn, and the 2 milk cows settled in the stall, and the whole of the Marlow place quiet around them for the first time in 4 years in a way that did not feel like being alone. After a long while she stood. She did not blow out the candle. She left it burning on the rail. She went inside and he stayed on the porch a while longer, and then he came in and banked the stove for her and touched his hat as though he were still going out to the bunkhouse, and went out to the bunkhouse because they had not married yet, and the shape of the thing still called for that. And she stood in the kitchen a moment after he had gone, and then she went to bed. The candle burned itself out on the rail sometime in the middle of the night. She had not gone to check on it. In the morning she came out with her coffee and saw the burned wick and the pool of set wax in the tin, and she stood at the rail a while and looked at it. Then she took the holder inside and cleaned it and set it on the sideboard where it would be ready for the evening. Reuben came up from the bunkhouse. He touched his hat. "Thrashing today," he said. "Thrashing today," she said. They went to the barn together.